everyone. We are in for a treat for another episode today in the Free Speech Forward podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Joia. I'm joined today by my fellow co-founder of 1776 Forward, Chris. If you don't know already, we are the co-founders of our movement. We are all about sparking a cultural, political, and philosophical revolution for a free society grounded in philosophical liberalism. And this podcast is our partnership with the Institute for Liberal Values. And today we're so delighted we have another one of the partners from ILV with us. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and he's going to introduce our wonderful guest today, Ken.
Yes. Hey, Ken. Thanks for being with us.
Glad to be with you guys today.
We've got, as Joia mentioned, everybody who's listening, we've got Ken Pope with us today, and he is an advisor with our co-sponsoring organization, ILV. Just a little bit about Ken. Ken is the Chief Executive Officer at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, located in Washington, D.C. Previously, he had a 34-year career in the U.S. Army, consulting industry, and academia. While in uniform, he served in a variety of armored reconnaissance special operations and Russian foreign area officer assignments throughout Europe, the Middle East, and Central America. He commanded an armed cavalry troop during the Persian Gulf War and later a special ops unit focused on Central America. As an Army FAO, he had a variety of assignments in Russia, Ukraine, Estonia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Kosovo. In the consulting industry, he led teams that provided strategy, analysis, and wargaming support to the Office of the Secretary of Defense and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He also served as an assistant professor at the University of Mississippi, where he taught courses on intelligence, advanced analytics, and led the program's national security simulations with the U.S. intelligence community. He's got a BA in sociology, an MA in international relations, is a graduate of the U.S. Army Command and Staff College and the George C. Marshall Center's Executive Program for Advanced Security Studies. His military awards include the Silver Star, Legion of Merit, Bronze Star, and from the President of Estonia, the Eagle's Cross. And now, of course, consults and advises with the ILV leadership team. So that is quite the background. Thank you so much, Ken, for your service. This is a great perspective that we haven't yet had on our show. So we're really excited to have you. So with that intro, without further ado, we'll just dive right in. Why don't you tell us your story? How did you come to defending free speech values? And is it something you've always been doing, or is this something that kind of came out of your wonderful many experiences that we just talked about?
Yeah, well, let me back up a little bit for the intro. So no longer the CEO, I'm now the vice president for partnerships for academic programming and also for strategic partnerships. So
Okay.
A little bit of a transition within the organization. So, but all good. But yeah, so as far as the my brush up with this topic. So yeah, I think I've always had this view that it's hugely important. I think it probably starts when you start, having, I think in a lot of cases, cogent thoughts, probably at the university at some point in your career while you're there. I think it probably starts there, but I think it was probably maybe a little bit of a skewed notion of what free speech is, or, why it's important. I think, a lot of students they're influenced by what their university professor, their college professor's perspective on the world and everything else. And, being, like your typical college kid, I was probably susceptible to a lot of that as well. So I think it was kind of a skewed notion of what it really means. I really don't think I really fully appreciated it until I had my first assignment in the Army. And that first assignment in the military was on the East-West German border. So I remember in college, all my professors would tell me some variant of, the Soviet Union. Again, this is during the Cold War. So the Soviet Union's not that bad, doing good things, probably a better system than this thing we have capitalism here in the US, blah, blah, blah. All these same stories, sadly, that's having a significant reemergence today where we're hearing some of the same things. But so I get there and I'm staring at this fence, and I'm thinking, if this system is so great, why are they keeping 400 million people behind a fence? So kind of that worldview. And part of that was free speech. So you start looking at what did the Soviet Union do to its people? If you start looking at the history of communism, how it all got started, what was one of the first things that Lenin does? Well, he goes after free speech. those basic personal freedoms that every individual has, and he starts, killing that off right away. Literally, well, also literally killing people as well. Mm. So, so then I'm starting to think. So my worldview about, what I heard in academia, what I'm visiting or seeing, played out in the real world is fundamentally different. So also in the military, what most people don't appreciate is that you forfeit or temporarily suspend some of your, what we consider our basic rights. And one of those is free speech. You no longer have the ability to say exactly what you think to whoever you want to, because there's a chain of command. And there's some really good reasons for that. And so, but you start to really appreciate that more when you have less of it. And I think that's where we kind of are now, is that in our society today, we seem to be, kind of limiting ourselves in what, it's whether it be a commercial institute on social media, limiting what you could say, what they view as permissible. You got some efforts the government is involved in that process. You got people who now they're afraid to say what they think because they'll be canceled or face censorship or be deplatformed and all these other things. So I think, young Lieutenant Pope back in the 80s would not recognize where we are today as the mature fellow I am now, looking at what I was standing against. In some cases, way too much of that has come to us areas that I never would have expected, way back then. A little bit frightening. So yeah, always an advocate for it. I think now we need more of it, vice less. I think anytime we're curtailing speech, we are selling ourselves short as a people, as individuals, and as a nation.
That's fascinating. I'd love to hear you say even more about that. Like, why exactly do you think free speech matters so much, both for yourself, for your own flourishing life? Maybe you want to share something about what that experience was like when you had less free speech and how that affected you. And then why you think it matters so much for a flourishing society as a whole.
Well, yeah, okay. So I think going back to the military, well, I think at times you don't really notice it because you become used to it. And I think that as a society, the same things happen now. We've kind of gotten used to limiting ourselves, which is very unfortunate and very sad. So I think that the right of free speech and the benefit of it is I think it's essential to a thriving republic writ large, at the individual level, but also at the corporate level as a nation. So, we seem to have forfeited a lot of that, what the founders enshrined in our foundational documents, especially free speech. So, why does that matter? So if you think about free speech, so first and foremost, what it is was designed to be a check on the excesses of government and to block authoritarianism and totalitarianism, what the colonies experienced when they kicked out the king, who his voice was the one that really mattered. So we said we didn't want that. So we created this form of government that we're able to now disagree with whoever's in charge, say what we want to say as a check on that. So being able to disagree both at the kind of the interpersonal level, but doing it in an amiable manner makes us better individuals, if you think about it, at the individual level. So we get to see different ideas. We get to measure, we get to test them, we get to challenge our own points of view. I think the same is true today if you think about academia, where a lot of this, same thing as a college student back in the 80s. If somebody said you couldn't do something, there would be a protest about, well, you know what, guess what, we're going to do it anyway. It's just the opposite today. Now it's people protesting to do stuff like that. It's like flipped. Yeah. It's amazing to watch. So, but what it does too is that if you're not challenging your point of views, especially with the government, then you get less informed, less good decisions, if you will. So I think it's important to be both informed, to be well read. I think one of the problems today is we used to read to be informed. Now I think we read to be affirmed, which is really sad. People are looking to get, hey, look at this smart guy. He said this, I agree with it. I'm going to post it. I'm going to get a bunch of likes. And I'm going to feel good about myself for half an hour until I have to do it again to get dopamine rush. So, but I think what it does too is if you're in those silos, you're not challenging each other. You're not getting the benefit of the group decision. You're not getting the best of the group. And I think there was a great quote by Thomas Schelling, won the Nobel Prize back in 2005. And this is what the power of the group that's really working well together. It says the one thing a person cannot do, no matter how rigorous his analysis or heroic his imagination, is to draw up a list of things that would never occur to him. And we can't do that if we're just sitting in a cubicle by ourselves or with a group of like-minded people, never branching out and never challenging each other's ideas. So I think that's the basis. What's really important to me is we need, as a nation, especially in government, we need people to challenge ideas in a productive manner so we get better decisions. And instead of telling us, well, you can't disagree with that because that's bad. So we're not going to listen to your voice. We're going to cut you off. We're going to censor you, deplatform you. And at the government level, to me, that's terrifying based on what I do now. I read about that stuff. And that was one of the first steps to truly authoritarian and totalitarian systems is killing off speech. That's why it's so important that we protect it.
Yeah, wonderfully said. And that obviously, your point about being able to speak freely, have those debates, get out of your silo, that's one of the leading reasons why we even started this podcast, was so that we could have these conversations with people across the spectrum, but who still believe in those foundational liberal values. So with your perspective, interestingly, in both an American context and in a former Soviet Union context, you got to see firsthand what it's like not to have that. So I just think that's incredibly valuable. And as you noted, a lot of those skills are atrophying, being forgotten, or just outright even being ignored, even in our current society. So one of the things we like with this show is to kind of delve into the method behind how free speech activists do their work. So I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about your process mentally or organizationally for preparing for either a speech or some kind of work, even this talk or any other kind of work of activism where you're going to be out there standing up and speaking out for free speech or liberal values, more being a leader for liberal values broadly.
Right. Yeah. So I think to me, the most important thing is exquisite research. You need to know what you're talking about on a topic before you go out to talk about it. That really is very helpful. So typically how I approach these things is I think it's exquisite research on whatever topic you're really talking about, and using primary sources to the degree you can, and trying to understand what either the person said or the topic, before my view is tainted by what other people have written about it, which I think is what too many people don't do today. They just go out, they find their favorite pundit. Okay, I believe that. They don't challenge the idea. So, think about it yourself, figure out, what does this mean to me? What is this really telling me? So you kind of develop your own thesis, see if it's supportable. Do I understand it? Does it stand up to the scrutiny of something else we don't do very well anymore, critical thinking, which means just asking a lot of why questions, or why is it so? How does it work? Explain this to me. Then I want to understand, I guess the next step is, once I have that, then I'll start looking at some of those, the punditry maybe is a good way to talk about if you're thinking about the politics. What do other people think about this topic? And then kind of look at the value of their ideas, specifically those who disagree with mine. It's not helping me to go out and just find guys who agree with me. I want to find out what the other side of a particular issue may be thinking, and maybe it'll change my mind. Maybe it won't. Maybe it gives me ideas of how to maybe discuss that argument or issue with them. So then I want to understand, if I'm doing it in front of an audience, who's my audience? How do they, which is one thing that I don't think we do very well either, is how does my audience receive information? What's their preferred method of receiving it? And then try to kind of tailor it, not twisting the message, but tailor how I'm going to say what I'm going to say to that audience and how they receive information. Because it's going to be different depending on, I would present differently to academia than I would to a military audience, clearly, for just a lot of different reasons. Yeah. So I think stories are key. Is people, regardless of audience, really, good stories resonate with people. Good analogies to the current situation really helps it. And I think a lot of it is also humor. People like humor, especially self-deprecating humor. People, they don't want people who take themselves too seriously. I think you come across as kind of pompous at times. But I think also being enthusiastic, being able to, if you believe in what you're saying, you should be excited about it. If you don't, there's nothing worse than sitting and watching somebody monotone it for an hour and a half. You just want to shoot yourself in the head. Regardless of how good the message may be, it's not resonating with people. So I think we got to be You got to work on the delivery of your message and practice it and be able to be excited about it if you believe in it. I think that's the key thing.
Well, we can definitely see your excitement coming through on this topic. So. And I have a question that hopefully will spur some of the excitement. This is one that we love to ask people, just to really throw this idea out there, that if you had all the time, all the money, all the resources that anyone could ever want or imagine, what project would you like to see in the world? What do you think is the most important thing that leaders of free speech could be doing to advocate for this cause?
Okay, well, for me, luckily, I'm kind of doing it right now. I think, now, Grant, I'll just, shameless plug up front. We're a nonprofit, so we're always looking for money. So if you think what we're talking about is good, then please donate. You can go to our website, find the red donate button, take advantage of it. Mm-hmm. But for me, I think I'm convinced that education is a key, both teachers and students. I think it's got to be both. So for me, it would be kind of educating folks on a more complete, robust understanding of the ideologies that seem to be on the rise again, which is Marxism, socialism, communism. So these ideologies, systems of rule that really are really the antithesis of what our foundational documents provide us, the rights and everything that we are given. If you look at the measures, one thing I always talk about with college students and high school students and teachers is, if you look at the measures that Marx said he needed to achieve, those 10 things in his manifesto, you're going to see a lot of things. And there's two words you will not see anywhere in that, and that's rights and that's people, because that is telling people exactly what the government is going to do under his system of rule. Now, if you juxtapose that with our foundational documents, what you see in our Bill of Rights, our first 10 amendments, are two words repeated in each one of those statements: rights and people. Because that's our form of government tells the government what it cannot do to us and the rights we have enumerated to us by virtue of our Creator. So that's it. So, but we have studies now that show us that it's kind of flipped. So we have about 36% of all Americans on a 2022 study have a favorable view of socialism. 40% among those 18 to 49. When you ask about their ideal economic system, for example, they say 31% socialism, 11% communism. This is horrifying, 8% fascism. So 50% have some favorable view or think some form of socialism. So don't kid ourselves. Fascism, National Socialism is in fact socialism.
Yes.
Just another aspect of this thing called socialism. But the one that really horrified me was a 2023 Cato study. So get this, 30% of those under the age of 30 support, and I quote, the government installing surveillance cameras in every household in order to reduce domestic violence, abuse, and other illegal activity. 30% of people under the age of 30 think it's okay to have surveillance cameras in homes. That is absolutely horrifying. So, how do we get there? So I think we got there because part of the problem is we don't teach history anymore, especially the history of this thing called socialism, Marxism. There was a recent study of academic scores for 8th graders, guys getting ready to go into high school. Only 13% are at or above proficient mark in history, 13%. Mm-hmm. For civics, it's 22%. And that does not get any better as they proceed through high school and college. Probably gets worse. So think about the impact of that problem. So you got this society based on the earlier stats I showed you that thinks socialism is a better way to go because they don't understand it. They don't have no fundamental understanding, much better, of their own form of government through the Constitution or Bill of Rights, those amazing protections and rights that we have as citizens of this nation, and they're willing to toss all that away and take on something that will destroy every aspect of what they think they believe in. It's horrifying. So I think that, to me, if I had the money to fix things, it would be our education system where we talk about these ideologies in a productive, accurate manner, because right now we're really not. We're telling students that these things are better. I mean, I was getting that as a college student in the Cold War. Okay, now they're getting it again, which is really, again, to me, is kind of horrifying.
Well, I mean, education is everything, and as you, I think, correctly point out, and uniquely from your perspective would appreciate, it's not only better education about the positives of the American liberal system, but also the negatives of the totalitarian systems. And I think it was good of you to note how all of those different strands, fascism, socialism, communism, authoritarianism, are all strands of the same, kind of totalitarian ideology. So
Exactly.
love that. Education at kind of the writ large level is obviously a great goal that I think we're all working towards. But in our last question, as we kind of wrap up our time here, let's maybe bring it back down to the individual level. Any words of advice for aspiring free speech leaders on how they can find their voice to stand up and speak out as eloquently and impactfully as you have in your career?
Yeah, well, I think the answer is in the last part of your question, and that is to actually stand up. Because what I tell people, because I get this question quite a lot. I mean, what should we do? Well, I'd say take a stand. Stand up. What you're going to find is, and I always give them a couple examples. So, having been in combat before, I know there's a couple truisms about combat. Two things are contagious. One is fear, and one is courage. If you would be the first man or woman to stand up, I guarantee you will not be alone. And the second example I always give is I was given a talk on this, and I always kind of read the room because especially if it's teachers. So there's this group of 65 teachers that we had here in the museum, was given a lecture on communism. And sometimes I guess the stereotype is most teachers are left leaning, so you always kind of wonder what perception, what's the teacher going to think as I'm giving this talk. I'm looking around the room trying to read the room, and it's like everybody's stone-faced because nobody knows each other. They're afraid to be either in agreement or disagreement. So about 15 minutes in, I see one dude kind of in the back third of the room shaking his head up and down. I'm going, okay, we're at least one. And then a couple minutes later, you got 3 or 4 around him doing the same thing. Probably by the end of the talk, 75% or more were nodding their head in the right direction. So I use that as an example. There's people there that are going to back you up most likely if you're in a room and you're afraid to stand up. So you have to be that person who is willing to take a stand, be the first guy to make a move. And if you will do that, you will be pleasantly surprised by how many will be coming along with you, I think. So I think, but part of that too is you just can't stand up. You got to know what you're talking about when you do stand. So become informed about this system that so many people want to put on America, and also about the foundational documents. So nobody reads Marx, bottom line. So Solzhenitsyn had this great quote, everybody knows the name, but nobody takes time to read it, which is I find that to be very true. But I would say equally sad is very few people actually take the time to read the Constitution, which is really not good either. So I think we need to get beyond this. So become informed, and it's okay to disagree. You don't have to disagree like some on the other side might, with the screaming, the yelling, the blockading, and blah blah blah. Disagree agreeably, but be firm about it. Because what the other side really wants, it's more than just censorship, but they want to create a society, and I think Hannah Arendt really captured it in her document on totalitarianism. And it said the ideal subject of totalitarian rule isn't the convinced Nazi or communist, but the people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction and the distinction between true and false no longer exist. And I would argue we're a good way down that path now. So you have to become informed, you have to know what you're talking about, but then once you do that, take a stand and just challenge the ideas. Agree disagreeably. Talk about, well, tell me why that is the case. Explain how that might work and why that's a better system than what we have right now. And challenge it. And some people will actually take that, and maybe you'll create a productive debate. Some will just, do what others do, yell and call you all kinds of bad names. But that's a risk you take when you do this, when you're in this business. But, I think it's important that we do. We take on the challenge and we fight our corner, appropriately.
Absolutely. So well said. Thank you for that great advice. All of the steps in what you just outlined, I couldn't advocate more. We advocate certainly on a daily basis at 1776 Forward. And looks like we might have lost Joia due to some technical difficulties, but we got her through to the end here. So thank you for your time. That does complete our time for today. So thank you again. For those of you listening, for Ken's organization, If you want to donate or learn more, you can go to vocmuseum.org for Victims of Communism Museum. And as always, you can find our podcasts on the ILV website, ilvalues.org or 1776forward.com. Look out for our next episode every 2 weeks on Tuesday that drops, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Enjoyed being with you today.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.